welcome back to a special edition episode of the Strength and Speed Podcast. I'm your host, Strength and Speed owner and Conquer the Gauntlet Pro, Evan Preparis. Joining me, I have the man behind Stoke Shed, Bobby Ross. Bobby, welcome.
Hey, thanks, man. Good to be here.
Cool. So this is going to be a unique episode, and what we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking, essentially adding commentary to my book, Ultra-OCR Man from Special Forces Soldier. It's a record-setting professional obstacle course racer. And ideally, you listen to a couple chapters in the book, you come back over to the podcast, listen to an episode here, and then you kind of go back and forth, and it kind of expands on what I already talked about in the book. But, if you haven't bought the book or you don't plan on buying the book, one, I recommend you do, or get the audio book. But if you don't plan on doing that, I think there'll still be a lot of great information on here because, Bobby's an entertaining guy, and we're going to cover some of the stories I talked about in the book, but, kind of cover some of the areas that I didn't necessarily go into depth on. I was listening to a different audiobook by another endurance athlete and military guy. He did something similar, and I was like, oh, that's an interesting topic, or interesting concept. So we're going to try it, and we'll see how it comes out, and I think it'll be interesting, though. Yeah, Bobby, any 2 cents you want to add there before we start diving into the first chapter?
If you haven't read this book and you listen to us talking about it, this is going to be really, really confusing, and it's going to sound like a horrible book because we're going to talk about so many different things.
Yeah.
So don't do that.
All right. So we're gonna jump right in. I started chapter 1. Starts off just kind of a generic history of ultra distance obstacle course racing, and I started writing it that way because the average person reading the book may not even understand what obstacle course racing is. So I wanted it to be like, all right, here's what the sport looks like, and then here's like a touch base, and typical 5 mile laps, 25 obstacles, blah blah blah, and then give like a brief history of the sport. And I actually, when I go back and I listen to it sometimes to kind of like critique it and then adjust things on like the digital version, but this is actually one of my favorite chapters to listen to because there's nowhere that we have like a history of the sport written down. And I thought it was really cool that I got to take the chance to like, all right, here's where ultra distance obstacle course racing started and kind of here's how it progressed.
Dude, I think what strikes me the most about it is just since it is such a young sport, I guess like your definition actually changes even for the beginning of the time that you start describing the history of the sport, especially as it pertains to ultra OCR distances, to the end of that section. So it's like it's so amorphous and weird and ever changing. I was kind of wondering, like, do you ever think there's going to be some kind of like, okay, OCR is this length, this many obstacles of this type, or is it be this kind of strange, it is what you make of it sort of experience?
Yeah, I think it'll always be kind of it is what you make of it, kind of like strongman where there's no set events. It's always like toss this keg over this high bar, or carry this absurd weight, down in this medley format. I think that'll always be the primarily the bulk of the sport because the people who are coming in want something unique and they want to experience something different, which is why they're there. And that's what I think makes OCR really interesting. I think in the future, there's a chance, we might see an Olympic version of the sport where it's standardized, right? It's on a track so that you can compare times on opposite sides of the globe and the obstacles are standardized. It's the platinum rig with all ring holds and the wall is 8 feet exactly with no kicker board and the pits are, 2 feet deep, et cetera, right?
Standardization is not even what the athletes want. It's not what I want. I don't run an OCR because I want the same experience. I run it because I want to be surprised.
I agree. But if you ever wanted to get into the Olympics, that's what they're going to have to do. And right. I posted a picture on Strength and Speed Instagram a couple of weeks ago of actually somebody, I think it was Denmark, actually built a track where they had like these divots and these essentially obstacles like built into the sides and off into the center of the track, which I think is if you want to make it into an Olympic sport, that's what you have to do. So you can.
Oh wow, that's cool.
Yeah, it's really cool. I had no idea that someone actually did that yet, so that was kind of cool to see.
It's still rock and roll. Well, like it doesn't matter like how much DeSena buys. It's always going to feel a little bit rock and roll because it's always going to be to taste. Season to taste. And
Yeah.
everyone's going to be wanting more. If you do the same thing year after year, even 2 years in a row, people are going to start talking like, yeah, it's the same rig they had last year.
Yeah. And I feel like it's exaggerated even more in Century, where everything's instant, right? Like instant gratification, social media, you're watching GoPro videos of the course. So people have that information and people are posting about it. So, and people are
Right, you got to
traveling
change within a season.
yes. Yeah. People, yeah. When races don't change within a season, some people complain like, oh, this is just like Tough Mudder, whatever, California. It's like, yeah, I know. It's the same brand. It's just a different location. You're not supposed to be flying to every race, but a lot of people do that because it's fun.
It is fun, and then people start looking down their nose at anybody else when they're like, oh well, I felt like I did okay. It's like, no, you didn't do okay. It was the exact same thing you did last year. Well, it felt good.
But yeah, I had a really good time writing that chapter. And I've thought about trying to write like a history of OCR book. And like you said, the sport's still really young, so it just changes so much from year to year. And I'm not sure, still haven't exactly figured out, if I was to do that, how I would craft it so it's not just like a list of race results, right? Like how you actually craft a story that's interesting and engaging, but also at the same time tells the history of the sport and tells the characters and the athletes we have running around. So
you'd have to go through a lot of pictures.
A lot of pictures, I've talked to a lot of people, and I don't know. Ideally, it would be a collaborative project, but typically when I do collaborative projects, I feel like, one person does 99% of the work, and then, it's almost more. Sometimes it's almost more effort to do stuff collaboratively versus just me sitting down behind my computer and working through things.
Right. You're just gonna have to negotiate on the front end whose name gets bigger on the cover.
Yeah. Any final thoughts on the kind of the intro to what Ultra-OCR is and what OCR is before we move into chapter 2?
I just want to stop and make a comment on the fact that Ultra-OCR does exist. Where are sports now? Right? Like, we are so bored of climbing or just running or like everything else that like we had to come up with like literally the most insane possible way to challenge the limits of the human physicality. Like the mental necessary to do, a marathon or even like an ultra distance run is insane. But now you add in literally anything else that you can imagine that would be difficult to that race. Like, where do you go from there? I think the OCR, like Ultra OCR especially, could be where it ends. This is sport at its craziest, dude.
Interesting. As an athlete, I find Ultra OCR is more enjoyable than ultra running because it breaks things up for me, and I enjoy that. I'm focused on the next obstacle. I'm not focused on like, oh, I covered 51 miles, 52 miles, 53. I'm just kind of focused on the obstacles. And I think, anytime there's a sport, there's an ultra distance version of it. How popular that becomes, it depends. There's cycling has ultra cycling, running has ultra running. Essentially Ninja is the shortest form of OCR, and then Ultra OCR is the longest form. Adventure racing has 6-hour races and they have 7-day races. So there's a spectrum everywhere. And whenever someone creates a sport, there'll be someone that affixes the word ultra in front of it, and then it becomes a bad idea. But people still come out anyway. And honestly, I'm surprised every year when I go to World's Toughest Mudder and to see the number of people that come out there. It's, and a lot of them call it early, but just to see that many people willing to be like, you know what, I'm going to see how far I can go and see what I'm made of. I think it's remarkable. Because you don't see ultra running races, at least not many, with like 1,000 people there. Most of them are really small. If you've ever been to an ultra running race, there's like 100 people maybe.
Yeah, it's your mom, it's your dad.
Yeah,
it's the guy you paid to pit for you, and that's it.
Yeah. Any final thoughts on chapter 1?
No, man. Let's move on. That's the dry stuff. I want to get to the juicy bits, man.
Yeah. So, moving into chapter 2, it's about essentially my youth, right? Going from, birth to just before college. I wanted to conclude a little bit about this just because it gives you an idea of who I was growing up, but I didn't want to go in too in depth. I've read Don Mann. He's a SEAL Team 6 guy, an adventure race guy. wrote a book, and he went like super in depth with his childhood, and I've read some other books like that where I was like, all right, I don't need to know, your first crush and stuff like that. It was just too detailed for me personally. Some people may enjoy that, but I wanted to give a little bit, but not too much. So, looking back and kind of reading through it, I think I gave just the right amount because obviously I hit publish eventually. But because I meet people now and, they see who I am and the stuff I do, and they're like, oh, well, you've always been like this. And it's like, well, no, not even close, right? Like, I mean, I think I was the slowest kid on my cross country team that regularly showed up to practice. I think we had a couple of like one or two that were slower, but they'd show up like once a week or something.
There are the washouts, and then there are the truly pathetic.
You're right, yeah. And I scored points for my cross country team once my entire, the entire 3 years I did it. And I mostly did Boy Scouts, and I mostly did drama and musicals, right? So like not the peak of athleticism at either of those.
Well, no, it was great. It's the right amount of biography. It's the right amount of background. It's contextual without being self-indulgent. I like it. Very classy.
Yeah. And then, I've read other, I was reading, Legend of Death Race, Tony Mattisi's book, and he gave almost no background. And I didn't like that at all. It was literally like a page of his bio. And then and then I jumped into Death Race. And I was like, no, I want more, Tony. Like, give me more. Like, tell me a little bit more about you. Where were you born? Yeah. So I've seen it on both sides of the spectrum. So I was trying to find a balance without, I figure people are either buying my book because they want to learn about OCR, Ultra OCR, or for the military stuff. And so I tried to lean heavily into both of those.
Oh yeah, it's great. And there's nothing better than the very first picture of you on page 12 at the beginning of chapter 2. Which I'm assuming is you throttling Hulk Hogan.
Oh, I've got a
7-year-old.
Yeah, I've got a chain around my neck because that's what wrestlers do, and I've got a wooden like dowel that I'm choking my wrestling buddy Hulk Hogan with. And as you can see from the girth of my arms there, I am clearly ripped. Sarcasm because
you are a magnificent specimen. It almost
looks like my shoulder. It almost looks like my arm gets skinnier between my shoulder and my elbow. To give you an idea of like how muscular I am at 7 years old.
God, would you please bring back that haircut too? You would be a living legend, man.
Yes, my hair was just unruly. It was long and curly. So if I let my hair grow out, it gets curly. And my sister used to always like, dunk me in the pool and then like slick my hair forward and call me Elvis. And make fun of me.
Dude, it looks like you've got a Kentucky Waterfall going in this picture. Like,
a little bit, yeah. A little bit.
It's fantastic.
It's kind of long all around, so I don't know if it's a true, Mississippi mudflap, but it's,
I haven't heard that one.
It looks pretty good.
It's so good. I really think that like characterizes the next couple of pages fully because, I mean, you were just like eviscerating your young self, man. You got to give yourself a little bit of credit. You were just a little dude.
Yeah, I had a great time growing up, and I don't, deep down inside, there's still a lot of that there, right? Like I'm still a complete nerd. I still love Star Wars.
We nerd out every time I come over, dude.
Oh yeah, every time you come over, I learn more about you. I'm like, dude, we would have been best friends growing up.
Oh yeah,
this is insane. So.
What you guys don't see whenever when Evan comes into the finish line and there's no skin left on his hands and like all his muscles are rippling and he's got 2.5% body fat is the amount of comic books. Not just comic books, graphic novels this man has in his spare bedroom that I always find something new every time I go through and I stay up until like 1 or 2 a.m. even if we have a race the next morning, just reading some of the awesome stuff that you have, dude. Nerdy as hell. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Batman, Nightfall, and
fantastic.
Superman Doomsday Timeline when Superman died, and
I read V for Vendetta for the first time at your place.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I stayed up all night. The movie's actually I think is better, which is it's about the only time I'll say that about a book movie adaptation.
Hugo Weaving just absolutely owned that character. He made V real, and it was worth every second. I agree with you.
It's funny you say that. So we'll get into this a little bit later, but I was obsessed with that movie. That came out on my first deployment, and rough deployment. So all we were thinking about was taking revenge for one of our soldiers that died. So like that movie like really hit home when it came out. So we'll get into some more of that later. But yeah,
foreshadowing.
Foreshadowing. Yeah.
About your being like growing up and like you're like, oh, I wasn't a good athlete, like I had a very normal childhood. No, like if you have like an exceptional childhood, then you're maybe predisposed to doing incredible things because you don't think like other people. But you actually kind of started out as a pretty just like normal kid, and that was the stuff that you went through later on in your formative years that turned you into, the kind of that gave you the mental wherewithal and grit to get through the stuff that you do now. And I think that's more interesting.
Yeah, interesting. And the other thing I was excited to do was kind of in that opening chapter, I gave a shout out to a couple of my friends that, I think I've always been blessed as a lot of my friends, whenever they found something they were good at and they kind of dove into it, and they found like a fair amount of success in each of their fields. So, we all kind of went our separate ways from high school, but we still hang out when I go back to New York. I'm still close to those guys. My friend Anthony, mentioned before, he's got 2 Emmys and 2 nominations for Emmys.
I look for his name in the credits every time I watch Last Week Tonight. I don't know why. Like I just keep doing it because I'm like, hey, I don't know him, but I know someone who does, and it makes me feel good.
Yeah, and sometimes he appears in like that. If you watch the show closely, sometimes you'll see him in the show. They use him as like a stock photo. He appears in the show occasionally. So I was watching a episode on a plane once, and I'm on the plane. I'm like, it's Anthony, and then people are like, I was like, yes, sorry, just embarrassing, but
best show ever. But we won't get into that.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
When they blew up 2020, that was fantastic.
I haven't been watching recently, but I need to. Every time I watch an episode, I think he's very, very thoughtful and very clever. We saw a live taping, me and my wife. Anthony got us into the live taping room.
Cool. That's great.
All right. Any other final thoughts on kind of like growing up and?
No, dude, I'm good. I'm good because I'm like everybody else. Like I'm just waiting. I'm waiting for chapter 3, man. I'm waiting to see where Evan became Ultra-OCR Man.
Yeah. So
I get to that first marathon.
Those first couple chapters are pretty short, and then so chapter 3 called "College America at War and Redefining Boundaries." So yeah, like you were saying, that's. I decided to go to college, Johns Hopkins, and I joined ROTC so I could get into the Army. And I just fell into a group of people that didn't understand limits, right? Like I pledged this fraternity as a military fraternity called Pershing Rifles. They put us through a pledge period that was at the time was like it was by far the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And it's still one of the hardest things I've done in my life because it, at the time, I just didn't have enough experience to be good at really hard things. So it was just, it just destroyed me. And
50,000 push-ups.
Yeah. Yeah. So we'd basically mess up, and they'd give us, instead of making us drink or anything like that, it was just physical exercise. So they would just pile physical exercise on top of you and give you impossible tasks, like 50,000 push-ups, and you and 3 to 7 other people doing sets of 10 push-ups for literally hours on end on a night. And then you'd knock out a good chunk of you'd knock out a chunk of it, and you'd go home, and then you go to the next meeting and you get assigned more push-ups, and it was like a never-ending cycle where it was just like, it was just like, this is an impossible task, but you have no choice but to keep moving forward because that's how you would get through the pledge process.
You said something that I really loved in there, and it was talking about your disdain for people who quit. And it kind of pertained to those push-ups. And I'm just going to read straight out of it. It said, quitting meant one person didn't have to work anymore, while the remaining members would have to work sometimes twice as hard. And so you grew like disdainful of people who quit because they made other people have to shoulder their burden.
Yes. Yep. Completely accurate. That's where it started. And it continues on through the military. Well, again, we'll talk about the military stuff, right? That continues on through Ranger School and Special Forces selection. And then, that mentality is instilled with you when you go into combat, because you can't have someone quitting when things get hard, because things get hard all the time. So you have, you have to be like, all right, well, this is a bad situation. I need to continue to try to win regardless of what's happening. So that's definitely where it stems from. Yeah, absolutely.
I was thinking about this the other day because I am a person who it depends on the context. Like, right, like if you're in an extraordinary circumstance, a lot of people find that they have more in themselves than they thought they did. They find that they have the motivation to either survive or to excel when they're in kind of alien or difficult circumstances in ways that they don't in normal day-to-day life. And when I think about you pledging that fraternity, you could have always quit and then gone to another fraternity.
Yeah.
Right. There was never like a time where you were in any sort of extraordinary circumstances. You were just pledging. Right. And yet you were already in that sort of mindset that said, you know what, I have to finish this. I have to get through this. And that's something that really speaks to me to the same stuff that I learned this summer when I did my first marathon, which was horrendous. I think it took me almost 4 hours to do it. It was a nightmare. I mean, I thought I was going to throw up the entire time. There were several times where I was just laying on the ground and I said, this is so stupid. This is so stupid. And I'm like huddled in a little ball and I just want to quit so bad. So bad. And I think about you and your years of this and I don't know. I get really inspired, dude. I'm kind of building you up a little bit, aren't I? Your head's too big.
So I'll deflate my own head a little bit for because I don't think I actually talked about this in the book. So when we pledged in the fall, and we were doing this thing called Ranger Challenge. It's like the extremely watered down version of Best Ranger. At the same time,
okay.
And it was me and my pledge line, and we actually all quit, and we came back and pledged again in the spring.
Nuh-uh.
So I don't think I talked about in that book because it seemed.
Oh no way! You left that out.
It seemed like more detail than I needed.
No way! That's the one time you quit ever.
But when we quit, we're like, all right. Like I remember like sitting in the basement of getting ready for the next meeting and being like, all right, we're gonna quit. I was like, but we're coming back, right? And everyone's like, yes, we're coming back. And the three or four guys I was pledging with at the time, I think three of them, one of them didn't come back, but the rest of us came back and finished. So
under what circumstances? Like what made you actually quit that first time?
New freshman, fall semester, freshman year, trying to pass classes, literally think I'm failing things. Doing Ranger Challenge, which was a huge time commitment. And then doing Pershing rifles on top of that it was too much time. Like I literally had no time.
Gotcha.
So actually in the following years, we actually started just doing spring pledge period because we did essentially the actives were like, well, it's too much if guys want to do both. And a lot of the guys in the fraternity were actually doing Ranger Challenge at the time too. So it became too much for the current members of the fraternity to do both. So we actually, from my class forward, we actually switched to spring only. So we should do just spring pledge periods.
Man, that gives so much more context to that. That definitely makes me feel a little bit better about myself.
And I do quit things. If you never quit anything, you'd still be doing all the same stuff you were doing as a little kid, right? You'd still be, playing basketball and taking karate lessons and doing gymnastics or whatever you did as a kid, right? So I quit stuff all the time, but just when I find something that I kind of have my heart set on,
it's always the why. Why'd you quit?
Yeah.
That's more important. Sometimes you quit to make room for something better.
Yeah. Yeah. And at some point I will quit OCR at some point, right? At some point I may not realize it. At some point there will be a last race and, I'll move on to other things or, maybe I'll be dead at that point. Who knows? We'll see.
Foreshadowing.
Yeah. Dark humor. I got a lot of.
Yeah, we got to get to that. You said that you would eventually talk about some of that dark humor, but once again, we're on chapter 4. We're on chapter 3. That's in chapter 4.
Yeah. And then, the end of kind of college, again, trying to looking up to some of the older guys going into the military. I started getting more involved in some of the endurance sports and, ran my first marathon with no training, no idea about nutrition. And, I went in completely blind. It was a disaster. And again, when we talk about like the hardest things I've done in my life, pledge period was one of them. My first marathon's definitely one of them. And then some of the stuff I've done in recent years, some of like the OCR America 2 stuff is definitely up there. But again, it was the lack of experience and lack of experience in other similar situations where you have no well to draw from when you need that extra energy, where it's like, oh, I've been through worse times before. It's like, well, I haven't been through worse times. Like this is as bad as it gets. Like it doesn't get any worse than this. So
Right.
I finished that first marathon, and I remember buying the picture and being like, oh, I got to buy the picture because I'm not doing this again. This is a terrible idea. You know, it was just like, you know, and if you read the book, you'll see I say that so many times, and I think every time I say it, I'm like, no, I know what I'm saying, and I'm wrong every time. So
That's awesome. 100%. I actually kind of wonder, like, was college where you started to learn how to manage your time really well? Like, do you have like a bunch of kind of a secret sort of methods that you use to make sure you have time for everything? Or is this just sort of like a being decisive, getting things done when they need to get done, and then moving forward? Like, when did that start?
Yeah, I definitely had a little bit of it in college. I think I actually started getting better at it probably actually right when I was getting into obstacle course racing, where I was very fitness focused, and I was taking a master's program at the time, and I was in this like the Army like majors course there. And, you know, I wanted to race on the weekends, and I wanted to train during the week. So I would do homework like a week or two in advance sometimes, something I never did in college. You know, I did the typical college thing and waited till the day before or a couple days before.
So hold up a second. I did not realize that you had a master's degree. What do you have a master's in?
Yeah, I got a master's in global international studies from the University of Kansas. I don't think it's very exciting, so I don't particularly talk about it very often, and I don't really use it too much, other than it's kind of required for my job now.
Okay, it's just a little bit of fluff. A little bit of fluff, you didn't even get any letters at the end of your name. That sounds like a waste of time.
Yeah. So, you know, other than that, that's kind of, you know, college and that military fraternity is kind of where I started finding that kind of endurance bug, and started sliding down that slippery slope there. So
yeah, you did the Army 10 miler in 2002, right?
So and I remember I ran 10 miles, and I was like, no one runs 10 miles. That's insane. And now, like, I run 10 miles and I don't even tell anyone. Right? It's just like, it's just background noise. You know, it's like
that's just Tuesday.
That's literally a Tuesday. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic, because that progression from like 10 miles to a marathon, and I guess I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but you talked about running marathons. I think it was whenever you left where you were stationed in Iraq, when you left a city or when you left a base, you would run a marathon.
Yeah, that was like my thing. We're just kind of jumping ahead there, but yeah, that was my thing for a while. It was every time we'd leave a city, I'd run a marathon. So I ran it around the base, you know, doing like something like 15 or 20 laps around a base, and then I ran it. I ended up running one on a treadmill in August in the non-air conditioned room in Iraq, and that was awful. Like, I was so dehydrated. Yeah, that was and that was, you know, this is before like the nice iPods and stuff like that. Like, I had like the Generation 1 iPod Mini, you know, with
yeah. Did it even have like one of those roll wheels yet, or was it still?
It had a roll wheel, but I mean, it was, I don't even know how many songs it had on it, but it was not a lot. And the no video. It's just like me staring at a wall and an iPod Mini. So it was a rough marathon.
Man. Yeah. Well, we're jumping ahead a little bit, because while we're at college, I really want you to go a little more in depth about that night at the bar where you discovered the knife.
Oh yeah, I think so. Should I tell this part about the? So,
yeah, absolutely. You should. It's a good story.
Well, I'm going to tell this because I don't think my wife's going to listen to this part. So me and my friend go to spring break, and the week before, and we're hitting on some girls, and you know, basically pushed out, right, and didn't actually go and approach them or something. So like that was kind of like a recent burn where, like, you know, we essentially we didn't get anywhere with it. So the next, like, essentially like 2 days later, we're back in Maryland at a bar. I see this girl there, and I was like, well, I'm not pussing out again. So like I saw her, I thought she was beautiful, and I went up to her. long story short, turns out to be, fast forward a little bit, turns out to be my wife. But yeah, later on in that night, we were talking and put my hand on her hip, and she had a Benchmade knife, which is, if you know anything about knives, it's like a really nice knife. And I think I was carrying like a $25 knife, and so hers was like $90. And yeah, I was just like, I felt like that was like a sign from God that, like, all right, this person, this is who you're looking for. So kind of, yeah.
What was that like those first couple of years? Because I mean, like you talked a little bit about, you knew that you were going into a career in the Army, that you weren't going to be around a lot, and you're both, very self-possessed people. I know you very well, but I mean, can you talk a little bit more about like what your early relationship was like? Like, did you do anything to prepare for the amount of time that you were going to be away from one another? Or was that just something that you just kind of try not to think about while you were together?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of, we were kind of dating right at the end of college. So we kind of always knew it was coming. And then at that point, it just became normal, right? Like, I mean, if you never get used to being around someone all the time, I think the transition's a little bit easier because all you know is that long-term relationship. So that's how we started off our relationship. Because even when we were in college, she was at the college, like, a mile down the road. So it's not far, right?
Yeah.
But I don't have a car. She doesn't have a car. So it's a bit of a hassle, right? There's no Uber back then. I mean, you could take a taxi or walk, but, and which I did sometimes, but, it's, we just got used to not seeing each other necessarily every day, like maybe you'd see each other on the weekends. Maybe she had crew practice or I had something going on the weekends. You'd go a week or two without seeing each other. So, she's pretty introverted. I'm at times pretty introverted. I can turn it on and off if I want to. But I prefer to be by myself a lot of the times. And that's how we started. So that's what we were used to. So it was pretty easy transition, I guess.
Yeah. And that was about the time also, I guess when you started doing triathlons as well, right?
Yeah. Well, my thought process was if I could do like what I thought was the hardest race at the time, right? Like an Ironman triathlon, then I should be able to pass the military schools that I have coming up. So I basically, signed up for a half iron and started just training. And like I got in the pool the first time and swam a lap, and my heart rate was like, 190. I'm like gasping for air, and and then I think from learning to do triathlons, I basically figured out like everything is just practice, right? Like I basically find a topic, I read a bunch of books on it, and then I just practice it until it becomes second nature, right? Like they're saying, don't practice until you can do something right. Practice until you can't do it wrong.
Yeah.
And I just basically, that's what I did for triathlons. And then I would use that same model to adopt for ruck marching for military school, and then eventually into obstacle course racing.
I'm really interested in your, I guess the triathlete phase, because like there are a lot of like swimming is in itself a skill that is so deep, no pun intended, that you could spend years just getting to a good level with that. And it's the same with cycling, but it sounds like that was kind of your beginning of like competitive swimming, and cycling was just getting to do the Ironman. Like, is that something that has followed you, that kind of like need to like learn something new and master it very quickly? Have you got any tips for that?
I'm not a very good swimmer, and I'm not a very good cyclist. So I really just kind of bumbled my way through both of those. But again, it shows you that even with very little preparation, you just kind of smear a lot of willpower on event day, and you can get through most things, right? Like, I mean, I was woefully underprepared for my first Ironman, but you just keep moving forward, and you'll eventually make it to the finish line. So I was concerned about not making the cutoff a little bit, not like very concerned, but it was in the back of my mind. I was like, well, what if I miss a swim cutoff? And I think like 90+% of the field beat me out of the water, and 80+% of the field beat me on the bike, and then the run, I usually run people down. But
yeah, I think people who start off anything need to think about the fact that like people like you, like even at the very highest level, didn't start off on the podium.
Oh yeah, not even close. And even still, if I tried to transition back to triathlon, I would get crushed, just because that's not what I'm good at. But and I haven't practiced enough, to be honest with you. But yeah, I mean, that's why sometimes I see some of the stuff in obstacle course racing. People are like, well, how do I get to do X, Y, and Z. And it's like, well, how long you've been running competitively? And they're like, a year. It's like, oh, you need to practice more. Like most things in life just comes down to practice, right? I'm a huge believer in the 10,000 hour rule. If you're familiar with Malcolm Gladwell and 10,000 hours it takes to achieve mastery. And, if you start actually doing the math and how many, if you want to achieve mastery in anything, if it's going to take 10 to 20 years of doing that activity. And that's with a lot of dedicated, focused effort. So with obstacle course racing, I just happened, we'll talk about this later, but I happened to be running for a long time and then doing strength training stuff for a long time. And then, so I had the muscle to do the obstacles. I just didn't have the neurological connection yet. And then that just requires practicing it a little bit. And then you can make those connections really quickly because the neurological improvement's really quick. Building of actual muscle and tendon and stuff like that and improving that stuff takes a lot longer. So
it sounds like all of these are lateral moves too. It sounds like what you're doing is kind of like taking something that you learned by doing this one thing, and then you kind of were able to sort of slide over into something that was sort of similar, and then keep doing that until you sort of landed on something like OCR that's maybe only a few degrees removed from triathlons, which is only a few degrees removed from the marathon, which was just a few degrees removed from like the 10 miler.
Yeah. I mean, that is spot on. I would like to say it was like well thought out and planned in advance. It was not, but yeah, I mean, that's exactly what happened. Cause I used my previous experience and the stuff I've learned and just kind of shifted over part of it into whatever my new interest was. And a lot of it transferred over really well.
Absolutely. Wait, I want to, like, before we leave college, what was your relationship with your dad like back then? Because like there was a really interesting exchange where your mom and dad sat you down when you said you wanted to do a full Ironman, I think it was, and they were like, "Do you think you can finish that?"
My relationship with my dad has always been close, and I think since then, I think it's even gotten even closer. He was a Boy Scout leader when I was a Boy Scout, so he was on most of the camping trips I was on. He was a soccer coach for a little while on one of the teams I was on, not all the teams. And then he, showed up to my school plays and musicals and stuff like that and was never discouraging. Was never like, oh, well, why do you want to do musicals instead of sports or something? He was just like, oh, it was great. It's great seeing you in the musical. And, at no point was I ever like, did I ever feel like what I was doing was wrong or embarrassing? Like he always seemed to be very encouraging. And, he tried to make me play basketball for a little while, and I didn't like that because I'm 5'6" and wasn't very good. But we've always had a good relationship, and now that I'm a little bit older, I can see so much of we're like the same person. The amount of times when we do stuff that's so similar is actually kind of eerie, to be honest with you. Like I don't know if we covered this when we were on the podcast talking about OCR America. But we were in we stopped for a snack at one of the gas stations, and there's 1,000 snacks in the gas station. And I go from across I'm like, "Hey Dad, what did you grab?" And he holds up a bag of chocolate covered pretzels, and I hold up the exact same bag. And I'm like, what? And it's not like, oh, well, we always eat chocolate covered pretzels. It was just completely random. And it was like, oh, we're like the same person. It was just, yeah. Funny.
Man, talking about OCR America, like jumping out of the book for a second, you're talking about you and your dad grabbing the same single bag of chocolate covered pretzels, and you're the one doing the marathons every day. But Jacob and I were getting like everything that we could find. Like, I mean, we would have so many snacks. I would just like grab like all the sweet and salty stuff I could get. Like I spent so much money just on junk food because I was like trying to like kind of, I guess, comfort myself in some way based on just the amount of discomfort that we were feeling, which I guess segues us pretty nicely into your next experience, which you talked about a little bit, which was actually finally going into the Army.
Yeah. So, a side note, I'm pretty sure you guys still lost weight despite us eating like human garbage disposals.
Oh, I lost 10 pounds.
Yeah. For that week. I transitioned, or I finished college, went right into the military, and before I even left my first assignment, they're like, oh, well, if you're going to the 101st, which is where I was headed, it's like you're deploying basically as soon as you get there. So actually, when I got to my first unit, I didn't even get an apartment. I lived in a hotel for like a week, went home to see my family for a week, and then I got on a plane to Iraq. So it was pretty, like, we jumped right in. So, normally you build relationships with the people in your unit, and there's like this big camaraderie going in. It was like, I'm going to Iraq next week, and I've never met anyone in my unit. So that was a little bit nerve-wracking. And especially as an officer, they put you in charge of people, right? So you're like, oh, here's this new guy. Here, you're in charge of all these other dudes who have been in the Army 2 to 15 years, and you're supposed to like tell them what to do. And you're like, I've literally been here for like an hour. So that's a bit of it's a rough experience coming in. So,
dude, yeah. Like, I mean, you were never in your element for years, basically. Like, I mean, you were just like kind of living in a place where you were always forced to push yourself out of your comfort zone.
Yeah. Prior to actually showing up to that unit for deployment, that was when I went to Ranger School and did the extended phase of Ranger School. I like to say had to redo a couple of phases a couple of times, and took a 2-month course and stretched it out into a 6-month course. And I'd say PR was kind of like the first big mental hurdle. And then Ranger School was, I'd say, really like a second big kind of mental hurdle where, I mean, it was just that's like one of the worst experiences of my entire life. It's just, I still have like nightmares about it occasionally. Just because it's just a completely miserable place. You're hungry and you're tired and you're grumpy literally all the time. And I say, you get a patch when you graduate. And I used to say, like, if they were like, you in order to keep the patch, you had to go back to the school for a week, I would be like, you can take this stupid piece of cloth. But, going in, it was, I mean, that was your whole world, right? Like, so the amount of pressure you feel going into that is unlike anything else I've experienced ever, right? Even in combat, right? We talk about it on the Mark Odette podcast, right? But like, if you mess up in combat, right, and you die, like, that's it. It's not your problem anymore because you're dead. Sounds weird to say, right? But in Ranger School, when you mess up, you have to go back to your unit and like be like, I failed, and here's why. So there's a lot more stuff you personally have to deal with. Obviously, your family is in a much worse situation than the other scenario. But yeah,
well, I mean, like, you talk a lot about that. They're crazy stories, right? Like, I mean, even when you talk about your failures, it's like a lot of that stuff is completely out of your control. Like, I can't imagine the frustration, but like, you don't talk a lot about what it was like mentally, like what was going on internally, like, especially like you talk about the time that you were marching with your unit, and like one of the guys, like, I guess comes up against a rock, and he says, I'm just waiting for the guy in front of me to keep going. Like, you guys were so sleep deprived. Like, where were you mentally in that?
Yeah, that's some sleep deprived hallucinations of Ranger School. That stuff is, for a non-military guy reading it, you're like, these stories are crazy. But like, anyone who's been to the school will have a bunch of similar stories of like that. And it was just very frustrating. You're just trying to pass this stupid course, which is very, very subjective. And, something like that could ruin your grading. And then you're like, dude, like, what? Like, I'm trying my best here. And, some guy is acting super weird for a part of your one graded patrol. And it's just, it can be very frustrating. So, by the end of the day, you always have a little bit of control over the situation. Yeah, I ended up failing that phase I passed. I failed that patrol, but I passed the next one. But
right. Did you ever like despair, like mentally, and like so like when you reach a place where you're like, I hate everything, and you're done? Like, I'm sure you got there, but did you get through that by like shutting that part of your brain down, or did you just like kind of dig into it and kind of go through and find the other side? Like, I'm just really interested in like kind of like where you go mentally, like we were talking about a ton in OCR America too. Like, where do you go mentally when everything is wrong, but you still have to complete the mission?
At Ranger School specifically, like when I was restarting on day one, essentially for the third time, I had enough, right? There's nothing I wanted to do more in the world than quit. I was like, this is the stupidest effing place. I hate everything. Like, I was just a completely miserable human being to be around. But at the same time, it just wasn't an option, right? Like, I mean, I'd spent almost 5 years of my life thinking about coming to the school and, physically preparing for it and, just kind of mentally preparing myself. And I was like, when we go there, quitting is just not on the table. It's just not something I'm willing to do. So I just
kind of sunk cost fallacy.
Yeah, it was just like
okay, yeah,
this is life now. Like, welcome to your new life. It's perpetual ranger school. And
there are no do-overs here, man.
Yeah. So yeah, I just took it one a day at a time and 1 hour at a time. And just kind of, again, you can't stop the clock. So you just keep doing whatever you have to do and try your best and see how things shake out. I don't know if that answers.
You did make it through it.
I did.
It totally does, because like it shows me a little bit about the way that we talk when like we're talking like on long races and stuff. You don't actually go, so like a lot of people talk about like, finding a place inside mentally where they kind of deal with pain, but I feel like you're not that kind of person. Like, you're not like going somewhere else. You're just experiencing it and deciding what to do with it moment by moment. You're just saying, okay, cool, I'm taking the input. Like, I've obviously got some pain, some discomfort, and you're taking it and you're processing it, and you're choosing to move through it each time. Like, it's a lot of, it sounds like to me like there are a lot of little decisions that go through that.
That sounds pretty accurate. I think that's
when you talk about like jumping ahead, like after you finally do on deployment, you talk about breaking down the doors. Like, if you're going on a raid and everybody's stacked and ready to enter a house, you just go. Like, you're already there. You're not going to stop. So you're not going to hesitate. You're just going to kick down the door.
Right. Sorry, one more time.
Endlessly fascinating to me.
Oh yeah.
No, it seems to me the same as when you talk about, like, sitting up in front of a door, getting ready to kick it down when you're going to raid a house. It's like you've already made that decision, and any pain or any other input that comes is really just stimulus that you file away and you continue to work through, rather than trying to like find another place to go and like distract yourself from it. Yeah, no,
that sounds pretty accurate. And that first deployment when we were in Samara, I mean, we did so many raids. I mean, it was well over 100. It was like almost every night we were going out, and we hit a couple of targets almost every night. So it was a very busy time, and one of the hardest I've ever worked in my life, and also very rewarding as far as some of the stuff we were able to accomplish in the city. So, and we were, the kind of the big, I want to say big highlight, big historical event I was there for, right? So the February 22nd destruction of the Golden Mosque, Shia Mosque in Samara. So
yeah, that's insane.
Which is, it was on the cover of Newsweek. I still have that issue downstairs in my basement. If next time you come over, I can show it to you. But yeah, the picture of the mosque destroyed is right on the cover, and yeah. So we were less than a kilometer away. Our base was a kilometer away. It woke us up from sleep. I was sleeping at the time. We actually had a platoon out at the time also that actually responded to the incident, and then they were quickly told to leave because they didn't want them thinking Americans had blown up the mosque. So.
Oh, right. Yeah. So. I skipped us ahead. I'm sorry. I skipped us ahead really far in that, but you want to take us briefly through the end of Ranger School into your deployment? Is there anything else you want to talk about there?
No, I think I don't have anything specific to say. I think I covered it. I thought I covered it pretty well. So
yeah, man, this is my favorite part of the book, honestly. Like, of everything, like there's so many stories, so much stuff that seems like it's not real life. It's like, wow, okay, cool. Like I would watch that movie.
Yeah,
I would read that whole book.
So when I initially wrote the first draft, I had skimmed over a lot of the military stuff. And then when I'd given it to a couple people to read, they were like, oh, I want more of this military stuff. And I was like, oh, okay. So then I just started adding more and more stories. So this chapter, like probably tripled or quadrupled in size, because it was just like, oh, well, I got another good story about that. Oh, you want stories of guys hallucinating? I got that. You want, guys running around naked? I got that. You got, you want stories of, mass graves we found, or, the king of Iraq's car, 1930s Rolls-Royce Phantom. And then I gloss over a bunch of the stories in there too about, I think we had when it was in Samara, we had a 107 millimeter rocket land in the motor pool. I wasn't in the motor pool. I was inside the building.
What?
But there are guys the trucks are in a semicircle, and the 107 lands in the middle of them like a lawn dart and doesn't explode. And they come running into the talk screaming. They're like, "Wah!" And I was like, wait, what's going on? What's going on? And they're like, there's a 107 rocket sitting in like a lawn dart. And, and when it lands, the motor's still humming, right? So it's like, and they're like, sir, you got to go outside. And essentially what you can do with rockets is you can shoot a back azimuth on it, and you can tell where the generic line they came from. And if you get enough of those data points, essentially they can do an intersection, and then it tells you like the grid where the rocket's coming from if they're firing from the same location.
No way.
So that's what they
insane.
Yeah, they wanted me to go out there and shoot a back azimuth, which is actually very easy to do. You just the compass, right? So like, sir, you got to go out there right now. And I'm like, I'm not going out there when the rocket's still humming. I was like, why don't we give it 10 minutes and then I'll go out there. So that's what we did. We shot a back azimuth. But yeah, that was, that didn't happen to me directly. So I'm pretty sure I left that one out of the book. And I tried, if it didn't happen to me or like my platoon directly, I left a lot of those stories out of the book just because, I don't know, that seems very fake of being like, here's a story of some guy I know. It's like, yeah, but it didn't really happen to me. So I left a lot of those out.
You had some good ones in there. I remember you telling me the poop water story.
Yeah, that's a good one.
While we were running one time, that was oh boy, that one.
People ask about like post-traumatic stress disorder sometimes, right? Like, there are very few things that give me nightmares. Drowning and like seeing my guys almost drown. That's one of them. I still get. I'll have a bad dream about that occasionally. The other one I used to get it all the time on deployments was I'd be on a mission and I'd go to pull my trigger and the trigger squeeze was too heavy, right? So like, I'm pulling with like all my strength and the gun won't fire, right? But there's not a jam, there's not a malfunction, right? It's just like I'm like physically too weak to pull the trigger.
Oh man. So
I
feel like everybody has that dream in some form too. Like you're trying to fight back, but you're not strong enough.
Yeah. So I used to have that reoccurring dream on deployments. That one sucks. But all my deployments, sounds weird again, but I had a really good time. There's some bad memories, there's some good memories, but it's also weird. It's just simpler, right? Like you don't worry about a lot of the day-to-day stuff, and you just focus on what you're doing, and a lot of everything else becomes background noise, right? Like, house and car payments, all that stuff, right? Like, all the dealing with trap, all that stuff. It's just back. You don't have to deal with any of it. It's just what your mission is for that day, and you come back home and watch a bunch of bootleg movies, and
yeah.
I can usually tell when movies came out if they came out on a deployment because I've seen the bootleg version. That's how I first saw the movie. So I have like very clear memories of, when certain movies came out.
It seems really like it's funny when you talk about like the good times that you had on deployment. It seems like that's the stuff that sticks out the most. And that really resonates with me because doing things like OCR races, or like when I'm on, doing this stuff that I do when I'm like overseas and I'm like shooting a documentary or something like that. Those are the times when I feel most alive, but they're also the times when I have the least noise, right? Like all the stuff that especially like as Americans in the first world are meant to like keep us happy are actually getting in the way of that, right? Like the TV and the phone and like all the other little commitments, like going out for a drink or whatever. It's almost like sometimes those things get in the way of the stuff that's real and that's immediate. Like, like your the camaraderie with your unit, or just like that feeling of like knowing that you're alive when you finally cross the finish line. Even though that stuff is hard and simple, that feels more real. Does that have anything to do with why you keep doing Ultra-OCR? We probably talk about this a ton.
Yeah, I mean, no, I think you hit it right on the head there. I also find that like the life's about variation. If there's no low points, you can't have a high point, right? So you need to have that you need to have the up and down. So I find that like when I do things that are really hard, it makes the good times that much better, right? Like, just completely sucking during a military training or an Ultra-OCR or something, and then coming home and, spending the afternoon with my family, right? Like it makes that afternoon so much better because you can appreciate it because there was a moment recently where you didn't have access to that and experience those things. So yeah, I 100% agree with the statement you made before that.
Yeah, you can't rush it. You can't rush that high at the finish line. You have to go through all the suffering to get there. And you had to do the same thing under deployments too.
Yeah.
Man, the warrior philosopher, Evan Preparis.
Deep, so deep.
I would like to hear a little bit about your progression in your marathons, because you were doing something where you were every time you changed, I guess, bases or cities, you were running marathons. Were you getting better?
Not really. It was mostly because the conditions would always change wildly. So I think I PR'd. I would typically try to run the same pace I did my last marathon. So usually it would come out to around the same pace or maybe slightly faster. But I really didn't start getting better until I started. I know this real dumb, obvious statement here. Until I started following an actual training plan and actually putting in consistent work. I know that's like the dumbest thing ever, but yeah, like not until I ran a marathon and someone was like, "Oh, you can, you're like 25 minutes from qualifying for Boston," and I was like, "Oh, maybe I should actually like follow through a plan step by step." And then I started like actually training like you're supposed to, and again, big surprise, the improvements were huge, right? Because at that point I'd accumulated enough mileage, and the actual training plan actually like fine-tuned and kind of reinforced a lot of those things. And there wasn't much progression.
Who would have thought?
Yeah, and I tried to, when I'd read some other endurance athletes' books, sometimes they would talk about stuff, and they didn't include like what their time was or like how they finished. And that used to always bother me. So I feel like I put a lot more numbers in there. So if someone else is reading it, they can compare themselves and be like, "Oh, well, I'm faster than Evan at this point," or "He's faster than me at this point." So you could see that, it's not necessarily out of your reach versus, or, maybe you're way better than me. When I read some of the other books, again, they're just like, I finished a marathon. It's like, well, what was your time? You didn't tell me your time.
Right.
So
sometimes we leave that stuff out for a reason.
Yeah. So, when I'm kind of reading through, sometimes it feels like I'm throwing out too many numbers, but I don't know. I think I'd rather give out too much of the numbers than not enough, in my opinion.
Agreed.
Those first couple deployments really shaped me as both an athlete and then like also as like a military person. I enjoyed being on the ground and doing the actual work, and I don't like sitting behind the desk. And, I spent most of my military career kind of chasing deployments and chasing more operational time versus trying to chase the next rank. So, and I don't regret that.
Yeah, dude.
So,
God, I hate editing. I would much rather be out shooting video any day.
Yeah.
I hate it.
Yeah.
God, it just ruins me. That's so funny. You say that too. You talk a little bit about just like the mindset of some of the other guys. Like you have so many stories about just amazing heroes that you spent time with. Do you have any other like supplemental stories about some of the people that you were stationed with? Like any of your buddies?
We'll save some of those for the next podcast. A lot of the special operations guys have some pretty insane stuff. I'm trying to think of some of the conventional.
I totally put you on the spot on that one. Sorry.
Yeah. No names specifically come to mind. Besides I think with most military guys, it's the guys who don't come home. That's kind of like those are kind of the names and stories that kind of stick a little longer. Because they, regardless of how much you do on a deployment, it never feels like you did enough because there's someone else who didn't come home and they did more than you because they didn't have the opportunity to come back.
Yeah. That's heavy stuff, man.
Yeah, you know, and I'll say this, maybe we'll edit this part out, I don't know. So um, that also, I have a really, and some of the guys I work with are kind of on the same page. A lot of the guys I work with on the same page. We have really a very harsh opinion on suicide, because if I see a military person kill themselves, to me, it's like pissing on the grave of people who died in combat, right? Because the guy in combat wanted to come home, and the guy who came home threw that opportunity away. Right. So I have a very hard time being empathetic towards people that do that. And it's not because I haven't been around it, right? I had a guy in my military fraternity kill himself on my first deployment, and a guy in my special operations company killed himself on it was like 2011, 12 timeframe. So it's not like I haven't been around it. And I actually had a soldier on suicide watch for a while, but I have a very hard time dealing with that situation as far as being empathetic towards it. And I understand there's wounds you can't see, and there's, people come home with all sorts of stuff, but it feels very disrespectful to me. So,
yeah.
So you always see people doing the 22 push-ups for veterans a day, and I just can't get on board with it. So,
yeah. Well, I think a great deal of that is what keeps you alive in the first place, is like that sort of, it's not just like a mental toughness. It's a desire to do everyone around you, to pull your weight, to be a part of the team. And that's valuable, not just in the military, but that's admirable.
So
don't get me crying, dude. Stop it.
Yeah. I'd say the other big story from that is, right, my college roommate died in April of 2007 from an IED blast while I was back in the States. So he's deployed, a different unit. I'm back in the States. He gets killed.
Oh, man.
His wife was also, it's a co-ed military fraternity that we were talking about earlier. His wife, both of them were in it. So his wife was like a widow at, 22 years old. And he died at, 26, I think he was, or something at the time, 25.
Yeah.
So that kind of, it really reset a lot of things, when both the military deployment and stuff like that, where like when you have a problem in your day-to-day life, it's sometimes I'm just like, it's just not that big of a deal. And I feel like because of those experiences, it's like, well, oh no, you got into a fender bender and your car's now scratched. Like, who cares? So you have to go into a little credit card debt to fix it or whatever. It's just, at the end of the day, it's not a big a deal. It's not that big of a deal. So I think that reset a lot of my baseline. And also, it was kind of a weird feeling because when you lose someone from your unit on deployment, I feel very responsible for it, even if I'm not like directly there or was directly part of it. But I was a lot closer to my roommate John Grasbaugh, but I wasn't in his unit, so there's physically nothing I could have done about it. So it was a very weird feeling because I lost someone who was a lot closer to me, but at the same time, I didn't feel like there was anything I could have done to change the outcome. So, yeah.
Yeah, you can't fix that with willpower.
I can't, no. Versus we had my first deployment, we had a soldier in my company die, and even though I'm not directly responsible, there's a portion of that responsibility that is partially my fault. I'm not saying it's like 90% my fault. I'm saying it's like everyone in the unit shares a little bit of that responsibility, and that blame. And I'm not using blame as like a harsh word, but it's just, if we don't know what we did wrong, we can't fix it when the similar situation happens in the future. So, right, every time we go on one of these military patrols, we come back and we do like a quick, it's called after action review, where you talk about what you did good and what you did bad. And, you do point fingers, but it's you try to do it in a helpful way, and people need to have thick skin, because if you don't point out the mistakes people made and people don't realize they're making mistakes, then they can't fix them. So you can't prevent bad things from happening in the future.
Yeah. Well, and if you don't take responsibility for the people around you, no one else is going to. So
Yeah.
like, how are you supposed to, do any good if everyone's out for themselves?
Yeah.
Damn, dude. I'm all pensive now.
Yeah. And again, I feel like people get a little bit weird when talking about some of this stuff, but it's just, I don't know. It's part of the job, and so some of the stuff is fairly far removed in time from when it actually happened, right? So that was 13 years ago. So parts of it are a little less emotional, and sometimes it's weird. Sometimes it changes, right? Like I remember going to his grave when it first happened, and it was emotional, and then for a while it was less emotional, and now I think it's more emotional, right? Because now I have 2 kids, right? And he's never met my 2 kids. He met my wife once before I was married, right? Like, I've got another almost 15 years that I've lived longer than him, right? That, it sometimes doesn't seem fair that I get to do stuff and he doesn't. And then kind of that goes for any of the soldiers, right? They didn't come back. So, I think I try to take some of that and I try to remember it and do stuff like OCR America, where I try to raise money for them and then try to, live out your life to the best you can. And, hopefully at the end of the day, I make up for it. I try to live for both of us is kind of my philosophy.
Yeah, that's it.
So
like you owe it to them to not only give your best in everything that you do from here on out, but to enjoy it too.
Yeah. Which is also
to savor it.
Again, is also why I have a very unempathetic view towards suicide, especially in the military. So, yeah, it's probably not PC, but it's the way it is. And we, with a lot of these military guys, you get into some really dark humor, right? Like stuff that like I don't even feel comfortable sharing in any sort of public forum. But people if the possibility of death is a little bit closer, you learn to live with it, and you become a lot more. You joke about it a lot more. So,
yeah, but I mean, like you acclimate to it, really.
I mean, you do.
It's not like you're getting weird. You're just like you're adjusting. It's good.
Yeah, it becomes a little more normal. So, all right, deep stuff.
Whew, it's heavy in here, man.
Yeah. What else?
Like a weighted blanket.
Got anything else before we before we call it an episode?
Dude, you took me on a roller coaster ride here today, and we started off with a Kentucky Waterfall with you like throttling Hulk Hogan. And then we ended up here. Man, I've been up and down. I've had a great time.
Good. Well, I hope other people enjoyed it, and we're gonna break it up into probably about four different episodes. Take a couple chapters at a time and talk about them a little more in depth and cover some of the stuff I may have glossed over, or some of the stuff that I don't even realize I glossed over, because again, it's my life. So if there's a gap missing, my brain just fills it in. I don't realize I've glossed over something.
We're gonna do more race tips later.
Yeah, we'll get into more OCR stuff. But next episode we're gonna start talking about special forces and special operations stuff, and then we'll start getting into some of the bodybuilding, and then I think we start touching on into when I start putting my foot into the OCR world after that. So,
and I will continue to put my foot into my mouth.
So I hope you guys enjoyed it. Again, Bobby Ross is from Stoke Shed. Bobby, where can people find you and some of your awesome film stuff, and share some of the projects you've done recently and have coming up?
Man, lots of big changes coming this next year, but right now you can still find me at stokeshed.com, youtube.com/stokeshed, and facebook.com/stokeshed productions.
And I know you released a Halloween movie a while back.
Yeah, we've got a lot of big stuff coming. That movie was just something that we shot actually with all of the equipment that we were using to work on a series that we're doing.
Ooh.
So yeah, we're trying to get it bought up, but if it doesn't, that doesn't matter. We'll still show it to you one way or another.
You always have good stuff, and I always love your work. So I'm excited to see what you have coming up. And anyone who's starting to put on a race or something, you should hire Bobby in Stoke Shed.
I might be there anyway, so you might as well pay me to be there.
I like it. I like it. We will we'll catch up sometime later. Pick up Ultra-OCR Man on Audible, digital, or hard copy, and actually read the story so you can follow a little bit closer along. And, you know, if you have any other questions, you can throw them our way, and we can try to answer them in a future episode. All right, Bobby, thanks for coming on.
Absolutely, man. I'll see you later, bro.
Bye.